Hey there. As most of you know, I'm Meredith Holly. I'm a lawyer and a certified life coach and best-selling author, and I help employees stop sexual harassment without quitting their jobs. One of the ways I do that is by working with companies on harassment and discrimination prevention and creating a healthy workplace culture. So today I want to talk about why I think you probably already are awesome at setting boundaries at work. This is a conversation I had with a client recently. She said, I don't know, I'm just terrible at setting boundaries at work. And then she explained it to me, and I was like, I actually think that you are not terrible at setting boundaries at work. So, I want to see if you identify with this. What she said was, I just feel so helpless because this guy just would come into my office and barge into my office over and over again and start yelling about things that had gone wrong. And I told him to stop, and he would never stop. And I closed my door, and he would still barge into my door, and I just couldn't ever get him to stop. I had another client recently say to me, like, I don't understand why I can't get this behavior to stop because I don't think of myself as a victim. And I've worked through so much stuff about this, and I feel like I'm really strong, and I feel like I always stand up for myself. And why can't I get this behavior to stop? Or even I was talking to a client earlier. This has been coming up with all my clients, so it's one of the reasons I want to talk about it. A client earlier was saying, I just keep thinking I should have made him stop. I should have made him not do that. Why wasn't I able to make him not do that? And we get into kind of a spiral where we just feel terrible and helpless and powerless and hopeless and all these feelings that it's never going to change, that things are never going to change. Nothing's going to get better. One of the common ways that I see this come up is someone touching us at work, and we freeze up and we don't say anything, and then we think I'm terrible at setting boundaries. And so I think often that is not actually a fair judgment about people. And so I want to see if this could be true for you. But first, we want to talk about, like, what is a boundary? What does it mean to set a boundary? And so a boundary, you want to think about a boundary like the way you think about your home or your property. So a boundary is always sort of the line of where my space is, and what I'm willing to tolerate in my space. So in order for there to be a boundary violation, someone has to sort of come into my space and violate something in my space, right? So the first thing is you want to be careful about what you're calling a boundary violation and what is actually just us choosing to go along with things, which I think a lot of times happens too, where we think, I can't say no, I can't say no, I can't say no. So I will actively go to this person's house or go along with the things that are going along. And that's really about getting clear with what we want and who we are and how we want to show up in the world. It's not as much a boundary violation. But often my clients are experiencing boundary violations. And so what they start to do is say, I'm terrible at enforcing my boundaries, and that doesn't really work to improve the situation. And often what I find is they are actually really good at enforcing a boundary. So when we have a boundary violation, it can also become a trauma. And one of the things that we want to that you want to think about, and that often happens, is that we start to get into such a fighting space with ourselves. We start to say, "Oh, you're bad at boundaries. You're bad at boundaries," and it actually puts us into more danger. We repress our natural instinct about what is safe and what's not safe, and we start fighting ourselves, and then that ends up leading to worse trauma usually. So an example is that the research shows that animals in the wild don't experience PTSD. Animals who live with humans, though, do experience PTSD. And one of the reasoning is that humans repress our natural instincts related to a trauma experience. So if you see an animal in the wild that gets attacked by a lion and the animal gets away, the animal, once it gets to safety, starts just shaking. And what they say is that shakes off a lot of it's like an emotional processing that the animal has. But humans are taught emotions are dangerous. And so we don't have those processes. And so it actually gets worse and worse and worse. And we don't process the trauma. We don't trust our instincts. And so that really can be the place where we get into danger. So if you find yourself criticizing yourself and thinking that you aren't good at boundaries, I want you to pay attention to it, because it actually can be a place where you might be putting yourself at risk by doubting yourself and by criticizing yourself. So like I was saying, most of my clients actually are pretty good at setting boundaries. They tell the other person that behavior is not okay, or they complain to someone else, or they kind of make it clear a lot of times that what behavior they expect. And then they blame themselves when the person doesn't listen to them, when the boundary violator doesn't listen to them. They think, I should have been able to make him stop. I should have been able to make it stop. Other people everywhere make this behavior stop, and I should have known how to do that. This really, instead of creating a consequence for the boundary violator that protects you, it really makes you kind of a slave to the boundary violator. Like, it puts you, instead of setting a boundary, you put yourself in bondage to the boundary violator. It's a lot of bees. So we take on the responsibility of changing the other person's behavior, and we blame ourselves for the other person's behavior, which doesn't get them to stop. And with many people, you can tell them to stop a number of times and they won't listen to you. And so you don't, like, it doesn't, if you are just sitting around feeling helpless and hopeless with a boundary violator who won't listen to you, it's just not fair to you. So a lot of times with my clients, they think that setting a boundary means changing the other person's behavior, and that that's the only option for protecting themselves. And it's not. Changing the other person's behavior is actually a very hard way to keep yourself safe, because it makes you a slave to them, and they're like the last person that you want to be controlling you, right? So instead, what we have to do is set consequences for a boundary violation. That means that you expect the violation to continue to happen. You expect the other person to continue to engage in that behavior. And then you set consequences that protect you. I'm going to give some examples in a little bit. But one of the ways that I talk to my clients about this is, if you work at the zoo and you decide you're going to go into the bear's cage. I don't know. Are they in cages now? It's terrible. Like, the bear's little area. And so you decide you're going to go into the bear's area. And then the bear comes at you to attack you. And you say, no, bear, I don't want you to attack me. This is my boundary. You probably don't expect the bear to listen to you. And a lot of humans are like that. They're not going to listen to you. But when the bear doesn't listen to you, you're probably not like, I guess it's hopeless now. I just have to lay here and let the bear attack me, because that doesn't work. So, Lundy Bancroft, in the book Why Does He Do That, talks about this. He says a lot of so Lundy Bancroft works with men who have been convicted of violent crimes in the criminal justice system, crimes against women. And he says a lot of times the people he works with say, I just lost control. I just totally lost control of myself. I couldn't do anything. And I hit her. I lost control. And he said, the reason you know that someone doesn't hit another person because they lose control is they do have a line they won't cross. So for some people, hitting another person is a line that they will cross, but they have a line somewhere. So what Lundy Bancroft would say to these abusers was, okay, if you lost control, why didn't you murder her? And they say, oh, I would never do that, which shows that they have a line that they won't cross. And so when somebody is violating your boundary, you know that that is a line that this person will cross. With some people, you can ask them to change their behavior and they will, but with most people, they won't. And assuming that it's their responsibility to change their behavior and that's the only way that you can be safe puts you in danger. It's like expecting the bear to not attack you if you ask it to, and then just giving up and thinking there's no other option. There's always another option. And so sometimes it's a little bit of a different version of this, but sometimes when we have a boundary violation, it is with somebody that we really care about, and that can seem a lot more complicated. But it actually is still the same. So an example of this came up with a friend whose daughter lied to her. And if you think this is you, then it's probably not you, because this has happened with a bunch of my friends lately. But so a friend's daughter lied to her, right? And so for the friend, the lie was a boundary violation, right? Hey, Allison. And so the friend was like, I want my daughter not to, hey, Carol, not to lie to me. And that's a boundary violation. And I'm going to feel terrible and I feel devastated until my daughter understands that her behavior was unacceptable. I feel like a bad mom. I feel like out of control until my daughter learns how to not lie and tells me the truth, right? And so she had two things going on. The lie was a legitimate boundary violation, right? And then she was making her daughter, she was sort of becoming a prisoner of her daughter's lie. She was putting herself in bondage to her daughter's behavior, and her daughter is like not the person that's responsible enough to control her feelings and her actions. So what you want to do is you want to separate the place that you're in bondage to the other person, and then set a consequence. Hey, Thomas, it's good to see you. I miss you. And then set a consequence that actually protects you around the lie and assumes that the daughter is not going to get this lesson right away and is going to lie again in the future. Another example of this that a friend was, these are like kid examples, because I think that they're easy to talk about, easier kind of to see as an adult as not so serious. So a friend was telling me his two daughters were fighting, and he said to the one daughter, you need to be nicer to your sister because it hurts her feelings when you say that. So the message that sends is it's okay to be a jerk as long as your sister's feelings aren't hurt, right? Which is not really the lesson you want to teach. Like, just don't be a jerk, right? And so when we are attaching our feelings to the boundary violation, it doesn't effectively actually set a consequence. So Carol's saying, how do you do that? Say more, how do you do what? Like, set a consequence. I'm going to talk about setting a consequence in just a second, if that's what you mean. But tell me what your question is if I'm getting that wrong. And so like another example that was more serious that I was talking to a client about recently is she's experiencing like just pervasive sexism at work, and she gets excluded from projects. She like people yell at her. She's in a very male-dominated field, and she works with all men, like one other woman sometimes. And so I was saying, if you want to include yourself, how do you need to treat yourself? If you want to create your feelings, what do you want to be thinking about yourself to create your feelings? So our thoughts always create our feelings, not other people's behavior. And our behavior doesn't create behavior. Our feelings don't create other people's feelings, right? So I was talking to the client, what do you want to think about yourself when you see a man yelling so that you create a feeling that you want? And the feeling she wanted was inclusion. And she said to me this great thing. She said, but if I don't feel terrible, it's like the sexism doesn't matter. So I need to feel terrible to show that this sexism matters. Okay, I'm going to talk about how do you set consequences with family members totally in just a sec. So what she was doing was punishing herself by creating these really painful feelings that were reasonable, right? Like nobody's going to criticize her for feeling terrible when somebody's yelling at her, right? They were totally reasonable and totally how our brains work, right? But she knew she had other options, and she didn't really want to take the other options and feel better because it was serious. The sexism she was experiencing was serious. But the sexism she was experiencing was serious even when she felt good, right? You can show that behavior is serious and you can still feel strong and confident and good. Okay, so if you're setting, so those are examples of when we're kind of in bondage to somebody else's behavior, right? That's how you know, is if you need their behavior to change in order for you to feel better. So what to do instead when there's a boundary violation is you set a consequence, and the consequence is always to protect you, not to force their behavior to change. You always expect them to engage again in that behavior, in that boundary violation behavior, and you look forward to it, and you expect, you're willing to have it happen so that you can enforce your own boundaries and keep yourself safe and take the responsibility for your own safety. So just some examples of this are like, in the lying example, like you can just assume that they're gonna lie again and not do any, like take any action based on what they say, right? Eventually, I've seen people, when somebody repeatedly lies and lies and lies, say, I really can't have this conversation with you because I don't trust you, and I'm just not going to engage with this, right? And you just take yourself out of that situation. Or sometimes you don't even have to do that. You can listen to what they're saying and just not act based on what they say. You can go check other sources, talk to other people before you rely on what they say, because you know that it's not reliable. And it doesn't have to be out of hatred or resentment. It can be totally out of love, and you just have this information about the behavior they're willing to engage in. In the workplace, what I usually see is like, you can lock your door if you have a door. You can leave a room if somebody is talking in a loud voice and that's one of your boundary violations. You can give yourself a break. Sometimes I say to people, think about your boss when he's yelling at you, or your employee when they're yelling at you, whoever it is, or your coworker or a customer or client. And then how are you going to reward yourself, assuming that they're going to engage in this behavior? So one of the ways with bosses is like, oh, every time you yell at me, I'm just going to go give myself a break and go get a coffee. And then I'll come back when you're ready to talk in a reasonable voice. But you go ahead and yell, and I'm going to go get a coffee. And then the boss is going to get more and more and more mad. But like what I see people a lot of times end up doing, they don't want to do that. They don't want to say, I'm going to leave and come back when you're done yelling, because they're afraid the boss is going to fire them or take some kind of tangible action against them in their job. And so then instead of enforcing their boundary, they quit, which is the worst case scenario that they're afraid about with their boss, right? And so they turn against themselves and they take themselves out of the situation, when you really don't know if a boss is going to fire you if you're standing up and taking care of yourself, right? And you can even say, I'll take my work with me, or I'm just going to go work downstairs, but go ahead and get this out of your system. And when you're done, we'll talk, if it's a boundary violation. And challenge yourself to treat your safety like it's more important than the other person's feelings. It is. like the other person gets to feel terrible feelings, and then you can still keep yourself safe. So other examples that are pretty clear are like calling the police if somebody's being a physical danger. We hold ourselves back from calling 911 all the time, and 911 is a great resource if you're in physical danger. Give yourself permission to call 911 if you're in physical danger in that moment. Other times, like obviously, sometimes I will file lawsuits for people who are in illegal employment situations, and that is a consequence. Like facing a lawsuit is a consequence for a boundary violation, right? Sometimes quitting a job or quitting in a relationship, sometimes quitting is a consequence for a boundary violation. And the way you know if it's a consequence for a boundary violation instead of a self-punishment is if it serves you and if your new step, if what you're going to is better. And obviously if you're in a dangerous situation, keep yourself safe, like a dangerous employment situation, quitting, like just take yourself out, be safe, don't doubt yourself if you have an instinct that something's dangerous. But in a general situation where you're not in physical danger, sometimes quitting can be a boundary violation because you're going on to something you're super excited about, that's a better job with more money, great work that you love. Other times when we quit, it's a self-punishment, it's a bondage, it's trying to prove to the other person that we're in pain, and that doesn't set a consequence, it just punishes us. So I hope that was helpful. I've been thinking about this a lot this week. I am also doing a program where I'm training power dynamics facilitators to be in workplaces and help employees understand the power that they have, use it to create a healthy workplace culture. And enforce healthy boundaries. So this is an example of what I'm helping other people teach within their workplace. So if you are interested in that, I am going to hold a class on what I teach and what it looks like. I was supposed to hold it today, honestly, and I didn't because I sort of overestimated my capacity and underestimated the amount of rush projects I had for clients this week, but that's okay. I'm going to do it next week, next Thursday. Send me a message if you are interested in joining the class. It's just going to be a free class, and I'll send you over the link, and you can get some more information about what it would look like to be a power dynamics facilitator. All right. Thanks for joining me, you guys.